That's the way it works. There are no credits on commercials.
But you got the Clio.
It's your job. I give you money, you give me ideas.
And you never say thank you.
That's what the money is for.
Welcome to Money Unplugged. I'm Chris Hill. Thanks for listening. Today on the show, David Brancaccio, one of the OGs of financial media, longtime host of Marketplace Radio. At a time when the show really became the first popular mainstream show in America about money and the economy, because David and his colleagues went out of their way to make complex topics accessible for people who don't have an MBA, which, is most people. David has earned some of the highest honors in broadcast journalism, including the Peabody Award, and he's kind of done it all. TV, documentary films. We talked about his book, Squandering Aimlessly, My Adventures in the American Marketplace. And as you'll hear, one of the things we have in common is we are from the same town in Maine. I didn't really know David when I was growing up because he went to the local high school about a decade before I did. But our town of Waterville, Maine, is where his lifelong love affair with audio began, getting his first on-air job when he was 13 years old. So let's get into it with David Brancaccio. We grew up in a time when families didn't really talk about money. I'm assuming that was the case in your home growing up. If that is the case, what are the early memories you have of money?
It was the case that we did not talk about personal finances in my family. My father was an English professor at a New England college and could tell you everything you need to know about politics, the arts, culture in general, certainly history and American studies. But I didn't have an upbringing where I sat on his knee as a little boy and he said, "Son, this is where you buy stocks, and this is how they'll appreciate, and this is what compound interest is." And here's the example of how little personal finance was at the center of my consciousness growing up. I'm half Jewish, and it is our tradition that around the time that you're going to get a bar mitzvah, I was surprised this actually happened to me, but my grandfather, my mother's father, Hy Fleischer, came up to Maine for my birthday, and he said, "This is a special birthday." And he pulls out a $50 bill. I'd never seen a $50 bill. I didn't even know there were $50 bills. And he gives it to me for my birthday. And it's amazing to me. I'm just turning 13. He pulls out another one and another. He gives me $200 in 1973 money. And it's so generous. He said, "It's okay, David. I won this money playing the numbers back when the lottery was." I don't know if he was pulling my leg or not. So I have $200, and I have interviewed people over the years who have become whizzes with finances and investment and went to Wall Street. And often the bar mitzvah money they use to buy some stock. And it's an incredible education for them. They learn about what the stock market is all about. They get to research some cool companies, and they see what happens over time. The idea of investing this money in a share of a company when I was 13 was the furthest thing from my mind. It was not even, no way it was considered. I may have considered saving it. Maybe my parents said, "Son, you don't have to use it all." Chris, I used it all to buy is $200, $199 radio. That's what I bought with it. Of course, I bought a radio because I've always loved radio. Spent it immediately. And I stand by the purchase. It was a Lafayette general coverage receiver with beat frequency oscillator. And, it let me realize my passion for radio. But it just shows you we didn't talk that much about money. I will say, though, that my parents were extraordinarily frugal. And some of it was forced frugality. My dad came from an Italian-American neighborhood in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, where there was not a lot of money. My mom is also from Coney Island, and there was more money, but they were, I would say, lower middle class. And my folks really were cheap. I mean, my sister still complains we would travel, and hey, we're traveling. It's not like we live such an austere life. We were traveling, I think, overseas, but we would get a European-sized Coca-Cola, which is like 7.3 ounces. Dinky little bottle, and my parents would make us share it among the three siblings. I mean, really? I mean, if anybody listening to this in the modern era with a big gulp would be like, what? Arthur Fromer, famous travel guru in the 60s, in fact, his brand is still with us, the Fromer Guides. He had this famous book, Europe on $5 a Day.
Sure.
And it revolutionized travel for middle-class people. I think the premise was it was supposed to be $5 per person. My mother read it religiously, and she did it $5 per family. So, we didn't have a lot of stuff. I mean, the thing that was most important to me as an object would have been to buy a hi-fi stereo system. That was my thing. And, it's hard to even imagine in the years before internet. How did you get information? I would write letters to electronics companies, and they would send me brochures about the stereos that my parents never let me buy. But I got so good at knowing what was a good piece of audio equipment that I became like I would be the buyer for people in our hometown. I went on a couple missions to New York to buy people stereos with their money. But it's just an example of I didn't have a good hi-fi system. When did I ever get one? And so we used money wisely, but we didn't talk about compound interest. Maybe it was a benefit in the end because, I got to this program, to Marketplace, in 1989. I became a freelancer and was London bureau chief by 1990. As I slowly acquired some of this information and did interview after interview and did a story after story, I could be a surrogate for the audience who also may have been on the same journey. And, I think, I don't know, if I'm so clever about money now, I'd be richer. It's been a wonderful resource to be able to call anybody you need to call when asking questions about this, which also substitutes for something else I don't have, which is I don't have an MBA, and I didn't formally study economics as an undergrad.
Same.
Really? Same with you?
Absolutely. And I find that one of the most helpful questions that I've asked people in the past is, how does the money work? When people are describing a business or a process or something like that. And I was like, no. Just tell me how the money works. Who gets paid? Who's doing the paying? Walk me through that. Because it tends to cut right through the story of whatever is the amazing tale they're trying to spin you about a business or the next great thing or something like that. Yeah,
so if they say, actually, we haven't thought about the money yet, but it's just a really good idea, then you know what's going on.
So was your first job the black market stereo purchasing that you were doing in New York City, or was it at the radio station in our hometown?
Yeah, my first job is at the radio station in our hometown. I had a radio job unpaid. Chris, as you know, Colby College is in our town. That's where my dad worked. They put a station on the air in the early 70s, and they couldn't get an undergrad to do Saturday morning at 6 a.m. I mean, you know what undergrads are like, Saturday morning, 6 a.m. So they got a high school kid to be the DJ. His name is Chuck. He went on to an illustrious radio career in New England, but he needed a newsman. Now, man was in quotes. I was 13 with this little voice, and I would read wire copy, but I thought it's really cool. And then the local station hired me when I was 15. But yeah, that was my first one, and I still love radio. I've done other media. We all do other media, right? What are we now? All of us. We're writing for digital. We're taking still photographs. I can cut in Final Cut Pro. I've made a movie, a documentary about money. But it's the audio medium I think that I love the most because you can do something else and still listen with your full attention. You can drive. You can cook. And everything else, I feel in the media, you're distracted. You either have 3 other windows open or you're looking at texts. I remember when I was doing television, PBS, I'd work all week on some investigative piece that was going to blow the doors off of some important public policy issue, at least in my own mind. And I'd get everybody gathered around the TV on a Friday. Let's all watch Dad on TV. And yeah, they'd watch. Some were half asleep, some were fully asleep, some were picking, fleas out of the cat. Others were looking at New Yorker cartoons as they were half watching. Radio, it's usually full attention if you're any good. So that's my true love is this.
So you were host of Marketplace Radio for a decade. I would argue it's the most consequential decade in the history of Marketplace Radio because you have growth in the stock market, you have the late 90s boom, the dot-com bust, and more people paying more attention to the market and the economy than at any point previously. Has the last 35 years of your life just been people asking you for financial advice?
Yeah, I mean, what have I written before? It's like being a chiropractor in a convention of contortionists, right? People find out, oh, you cover this? What stock should I buy? And, I always say, look, do I look all that rich? Be careful before you ask people that kind of question. Find out how successful they themselves have been. Often you see these books that come into your office and come into my office about how to get rich from someone who's not rich trying to sell a book. It's great, though, because it's a way to connect with people and have a polite conversation. It doesn't have to be instantly politicized in a world where everything seems to be politicized. I don't have accreditation in personal finance, but often if you end up having a rich conversation just by asking people why you're asking the question, what are their goals. I remember filling in, we had a dedicated personal finance show for some years on the weekend. It was a sibling program to Marketplace, same company. And we had this amazing caller the day I was hosting fill-in that he was in his low 20s. So let's say he was 24 if my memory serves. And he was saving a crazy amount of all of his paychecks. And he was proud of himself. And he's a role model. I mean, if more like that, this country would be great. And I am a huge advocate of savings because I think it buys you freedom if you don't have debt. All these things. And I didn't make the comment, but the expert that was sitting with me made the comment to the poor guy. You're saving too much. You need to have life experience. You need to do things. He wasn't clear what he was saving for, which I thought was interesting. And, I'm not advocating you should go out and buy frivolous things and run up restaurant bills and be silly and buy a car that he can't afford. But, he was 24 and he should be experiencing life somewhat. So you can overdo it and you can be too conservative with this stuff. But that's what I like the most about personal finance is actually not the money moving around. It's what you can learn about people.
Well, and it ties into the book you wrote, Squandering Aimlessly, where it's what do you do with a windfall? 13-year-old David goes out and buys a $199 radio when people are adults and they get a windfall. Do they go to Vegas? Do they buy a house? Do they start a business? Do they look to donate a lot of money to charity? What surprised you the most when you were writing that book, traveling around the country and talking with all those people?
It was fun. I mean, it turns out that lots of people, certainly not everybody, but more people than you think, have little bits of extra cash in their lives. Maybe it's an insurance settlement. Maybe you got $4,000 for your wedding. But there's it doesn't have to be a gargantuan lump sum. It could be a gargantuan lump sum if you sold your house at a big profit and downsized. So I was on the theory that what you do with a lump sum says something about who you are. I asked people, I'm really charitable. I really believe in charity. And then you get a lump sum and none of it goes to charity. I mean, that was kind of part of this. I was impressed by how the real answer to that question is you think about it as a portfolio. It doesn't have to go to one thing, and that you could be charitable. You could invest in yourself with some of the money. That might be education, or it might help you start a business. But you can divide up a lump sum in a way that lets you answer that question multiple ways at once. In that book, I came across a study. A bunch of economists were having a convention on a Caribbean island. I'm going to imagine it was Grand Cayman. Can't remember exactly where it was. It was a place that allowed gambling. And as an experiment in the swag bag, they gave all these economists $50 or $100 on the condition that they report back what they did. And so you think, well, economist, I hope you invested in T-bills or and most of them gambled it away.
Sure.
They saw it as funny money, and it's not like real money.
You're just handing me money I didn't have before?
Yeah. So why can't I just, set it aflame? I loved finding that out because, we're all human.
Later in the speed round, you're going to hear why David should probably think about opening his own restaurant. If I open my own restaurant, the first people I'm calling to help stock my kitchen are the folks at Dizzy Pig Barbecue. Because it is no coincidence that my grilling and cooking got better once I started using their seasonings. Chicken, beef, pork, seafood, vegetables, it doesn't matter. Dizzy Pig has got the rubs and spices to impress your guests and make your taste buds happy. You can go savory with a little bit of sweet. You can go with as much heat as you want. I love their spicy pineapple head mix. I'm a fan of their Crossroads Southern Barbecue. And Dizzy Pig, they're a small family-owned business. And that matters because they actually grind whole spices just before bottling. These are true craft products. They are made in small batches and bottled by hand. There's so many great flavors. You can get pretty much whatever you want, but if you want my advice, think about getting their sampler pack. That way you can test out 5 different flavors. Go to dizzypigbbq.com, use the promo code MONEY, and get 10% off your first purchase. You can click the link in the show notes or go to dizzypigbbq.com and get 10% off just by using the promo code MONEY. All right, let's get back to David. I'm curious the extent to which you and your wife talked about money before you got married.
Mary Brancaccio, she is a journalist and then became a teacher, a school teacher and a professor, and is now a poet. She has some published work. It's very, very powerful. She is
public school teacher and a poet. She really went for the big money jobs.
Yeah, exactly. I was just doing our Schedule C for taxes this year, and her poetry income. Yeah, it's not a huge tax liability, but that's not what it's about. It's about seeing the world in a new way. But she's much more clear-eyed about personal finances. She doesn't just glance at bills. She goes through everything quite carefully. But she is ruthless about paying down debt. And I don't push back, but I secretly go in the other room and cry. I mean, she was just raking what was coming in right at payday and sticking it into paying down our mortgage. And, you go back at the end of the year and look back how much we had paid down that mortgage, so we weren't paying mortgage interest. It was super wise. And it got to the point where we own the house outright, which is an amazing achievement. And I have very little to do with that because I wouldn't have spent it all, but I would have been like, I wish I was liquid so I could think about spending it. Man needs a new car somehow in the next 10 years. And she's really good about that. But you asked about whether we talked about finances when we were leading up to get married. And we did. I've met people who, when they got engaged, realized that their partner the person was inheriting tons of debt by getting married. And, you kind of want to know if you're getting into that. And we were always on the same page about kind of the frugality meter is very aligned between Mary and I. Here's an example. We do not go to starred Michelin restaurants on any regular basis. We don't. And we live near New York. We could come into fancy restaurants a lot. We don't. We probably eat out a little too much, but not at that level. But it seems like okay that if we saved, could we go to a 3-star once in our life? And we saved. It took about 6 months worth of savings, and we were both really aligned on this goal. And we were in San Sebastian in the Basque region of Spain and went to one of the greatest dinners of our lives. But we knew how much it would cost, and we were setting money aside just for this. It wasn't insane. The whole thing was probably like $500, which is a lot when I say it out loud, but for a once-in-a-lifetime thing, not so terrible. But we didn't just go, oh, let's just do this and we'll stick it on credit cards and just pretend it'll go away. We planned on that. And we've been aligned since the beginning on this stuff, but I admit that when I have to be grabbed by both shoulders and looked in the eye when it comes to, look, I'm putting away $2,000 from a paycheck, so we need to be very careful until the next paycheck. Let's eat what's in the fridge already and put some things in the microwave until the next paycheck. And I'm like, okay.
Let's move to the speed round. What is a thing that you've bought that makes you happy?
All right, I'm going to get grand on you here because lots of small things make me happy. All right, I saved up forever on the most ridiculous coffee machine the world has ever known. I mean, not like the ones inside a proper cafe. Those are $20,000. But I'm talking about a coffee machine that costs like what a MacBook Pro costs. That's got valves and pressure meters and tubes and weighs about 45 pounds. Took me 2 months to master this.
I was going to say, it also sounds like something that you need a training course to learn.
It took me a long time. And the coffee people online are out of their minds. I mean, they're way over the top, and they're very didactic. It's like, you must do this and you can't have, if your water temperature is above 198, you've embarrassed yourself, which, by the way, is not true. You key the water temperature to the type of roasted bean. I really enjoy this thing, and I'm getting good results. And, Chris, if you went to Starbucks and bought a medium-sized fancy coffee twice a day for 6 months, just 6 months, it would be close to the cost of this machine. So Mary says, but you don't go to Starbucks.
I was going to say, this sounds like part of the pitch that you made to Mary to justify this
Absolutely. Purchase. And, if it isn't, what's wonderful? I didn't have to ask permission. And occasionally, like when she decided to go to graduate school, it wasn't like she came to me saying, I want to spend this money. It is something that if it's important to somebody, they should just do it. But I did feel defensive about the whole thing. It does give me pleasure. And that calculation, by the way, does not take into account the cost of the coffee beans that I would use in 6 months. So it's kind of a false comparison. Cognitive dissonance there. But it's that's something that was a big ticket item, was not necessary. I mean, you need a laptop computer, so that the same price, but it was an extravagance.
Have you ever made a purchase at any point in your life that you regret and sometimes you still think about it?
Yes, many. I spent actual American cash for a cardboard device that would apparently train the cat to use the actual toilet. You ever met a cat? Not money well spent in my case. The first time the toilet flushed, the cat was spooked. Its hair went on end. It ran away and never got near the cardboard device. So that was not one of our, I wasn't thinking all that clearly. But in this, and then you can get back to the lightning round, I'm very proud of an innovation when it comes to non-discretionary spending. And I think this will save lives. And I offer it free if people would want to use it. It is an antidote to road rage, and it actually works.
I'm all ears.
So I'm half Italian, and I've been known to be annoyed in traffic, and that's dangerous.
I'm very Irish, and the same.
Yeah. And we're from New England, where when you drive through Massachusetts, sometimes you see things that are not optimal on the roads. All right, so I would prefer not to be a hothead on the road. I think that would be dangerous. So this is what you do. If someone egregiously cuts you off in traffic or does something awful or uses a gesture aimed at you that is not all that polite, you go, I just got a point. And you accumulate the points. In fact, you almost hope people will cut you off in traffic because you get more points. And when you get to 20 points, could take a week, could take a couple months, you buy yourself something you want. Now, Mary says, an ice cream cone. I say, a camera. It actually works. You're like, they're doing you a favor when you see egregious behavior. And you just got to take pretty close tally, and you have to set a firm goal. And it could just be some beef jerky. It could be something modest, or it could be something bigger. But you feel all the potential tension of the situation drain from you, and you just smile your way down the road. So that works, and I never patented it. So everyone's welcome to use it.
I love this system. What is a charitable cause that you like to support?
For just a $10 membership level to public radio, you can ensure that coverage like this, I do it. But seriously, I've covered a lot of disasters in my time. Here I'm a business reporter, but like there was a horrible earthquake in northern Turkey some decades ago, and 30,000 people died. And I was over there. What's the business story? There was a business story. What is the logistics of disaster? How do you get medical aid into a disaster zone that's the stuff people need, that goes to the right place quickly? There is a charitable organization that does this and has existing relationships with pharmaceutical manufacturers and other companies that might make bandages and so forth, and splints and medicines, and has existing contacts in various countries, like a medical contact, so they know who to deal with. They also know how to charter a plane quickly. Should I mention the name?
Sure.
AmeriCares is an outfit that I've been focused on over the years. When one of these terrible things happens, you don't want to just sit by. And I just like the fact that their acumen when it comes to logistics is second to none. And, I cover logistics as one of the business beats. So that's just one example.
What is one thing that you wish you knew earlier about money?
I didn't know that the inflation that I grew up with wasn't just a law of physics, that in fact we would end up with over 25 years of quite low inflation. I don't think anybody predicted it. But, the second oil shock, I'm a late teenager. And I remember my early radio job in Waterville, Maine I was doing, the weather was sponsored by the local savings bank. And I can remember doing the little ad. The weather brought to you by the Waterville Savings Bank, the family bank, now paying interest daily on regular savings accounts at 5.25%.
Hey,
Passbook savings account. Why not? But that's because, a mortgage was 17%, and so I just thought, I didn't know that inflation was going to go down, mortgage rates would go down, and that buying property, for instance, would have been easier for my generation than it was for my parents' generation. The penny hadn't dropped in my teenage head that if you save, first of all, and if you also pay down debt and are careful with credit cards, it buys you freedom. And I don't know if I have many heroes. I have a few. One of them walked right into the studio one day. I couldn't believe I had the chance. William Shatner, Captain Kirk from Star Trek, was in the house. We cajoled him. He was here to interview with somebody else, but I wanted to talk to the man. And he's very entrepreneurial. He's got all these business ventures. So I lured him into the seat by saying he could mention one of his business ventures. But then I said, Mr. Shatner, any personal finance tips for the fans? One of those questions. And boy, he hit it right out of the park. He said, first of all, he didn't make much money off the first Star Trek series. He was living in like a trailer or something afterwards, he claims. But he said he understood when money started coming in that he needed to not be in debt. And he was careful, and he said very clearly he could not have embraced really important opportunities if he was saddled with debt. If you have the wherewithal, which many people don't, but if you have the wherewithal to keep debt lower or to pay debt down, it gives you room for maneuvering. I knew that credit cards are potentially useful when I was a kid, but they seemed potentially dangerous. I understood from a very early age that when you open a credit card statement, the bold shows you your minimum payment. And the smaller is what you actually have racked up. And when I talk to young people about this, I talk about, I go, what do you want to buy? And they'll say an upgraded smartphone, $700. And then I'll do the calculation of the typical minimum payment. If you only paid the minimum, it would be like, years and years till it's paid off, and you pay all this interest. And I got credit cards early, so I didn't make the college mistake with credit cards. But I didn't understand that for that pain of paying off some debt that you do have, it's a really good feeling on the other side. And I certainly understand that now.
What was the last thing you splurged on just for yourself?
My last name is what? Brancaccio. Terrible pizza for 45 years. Terrible pizza. It would come out like Wonder Bread. It would come out like Ritz cracker. Terrible. I bought a pizza oven. Not all that expensive. It's outside. I got good at it. Again, that took a couple months. I would say it's as good as some of these Neapolitan places that I go to in New York. And that was $599 smackaroos. That was not nothing. And then I had to buy like a stainless steel cart for it, and then the propane tank. And a spatula, a giant one. So, it racks up. But, I'm telling you that if I make my own pizzas instead of going out, by the year star date 2173.5, I will have saved money in the end.
I was going to say, between the coffee and the pizza, I think you got a little side hustle going.
I know, with that last name of mine. Like Brancaccio's Cappuccino and Pizzeria. I think it would work fine.
Do you have a favorite movie, TV show, or fictional character that has money as a through line?
Everyone says this one, but we just rewatched it for the show and invited our listeners to watch it. A movie from the 80s with Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd, Trading Places, tells you a lot about the commodities market. And some of the humor from the 80s doesn't travel.
No, it does not.
There are some parts of it that are fully offensive, and it's not for everybody. It was barely for me. However, it is about privilege, that film. It is about class. And it's a meditation on that. And that is one of my favorite movies about money.
The last thing is a penny for your thoughts. It's a little bit of life wisdom that you can share with people listening. It doesn't have to be about money, but it could be. But just anything you've learned these many years that you can share.
Two things. I think that any two Americans will disagree quite fervently on any number of policy matters, and that's what America is. Disagreeing on social issues, disagreeing on choices that we make in the economy. But I would like to live in a country where we agree on one thing, which is the rule of law, that there are rules, there are consequences for bad actions, there are penalties if you break a law. And I think that what makes us great is that we're the place where, for instance, corruption is not allowed to flourish as it might in a different country. So I would urge people to keep an eye on what the rules are and if those are being broken as a sort of meta thing to follow during the times we live in. If you're looking for something lighter, I don't even know if they're mine. I've repeated them for years. You want to be successful in this world? Show up on time. Do not drink to excess. And learn Mandarin. If you do those three things, you'll be golden. Now, you're like, Mandarin? We're going to put up tariffs. I don't mean Mandarin. I mean, if you have an understanding, maybe even a linguistic understanding, of another part of the world, you have this strategic advantage in a world that, even if the era of globalization is, you think, over, and this is the return to mercantilism that we're living in now, you will be the person they pick because you understand multiple cultures and not just your own. And so those three things will usually do it. Show up on time, don't drink to excess, and learn how a different culture works.
There you go. David's book, Squandering Aimlessly, is available wherever you buy books, and you can listen to him on the Marketplace Morning Report on whatever app you're listening to right now. If you have questions or comments for the show, drop a note to info@moneyunpluggedpod.com. I'm Chris Hill. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.